In case you're wondering, I wasn't texting. I'm setting my timer so I don't go long. I have missed you guys. It is so good to see you again. Yeah. If you don't know, but by the way, if you've only been attending the church for the last 90 days, you don't even know who I am. And my name is Bob Reeves, and I serve as pastor here. I just wanted to let you know, I had a phenomenal journey, a northern walk across Spain called the Camino de Santiago Compostela. It exceeded my expectations, and it was more beautiful than I could imagine, just as hard as I imagined. Some of you were worried about my knees holding up because I had double knee replacement a couple years ago and how they would do. And the knees were the one thing that held up great. Everything else was a little suspect, but held up great. And what I do want to say is, first of all, I didn't have a single moment of anxiety or worry about how things were going back here because we have such a phenomenal team. Can we just say thank you for the team who just led so brilliantly? Yeah. And some of you are wondering if I'm going to take the morning to talk about my pilgrimage on the Camino de Santiago, and the answer is no, I'm not doing that today, because for some people that would just feel like, oh, the pastor went on vacation and now he's going to show us his pictures, but on Tuesday we are shooting a podcast, and so that will be made available to anyone who wants to see it. And I'll share some of my experiences and some of the things that I learned or relearned or affirmed in learning. And I can tell you it was beautiful. I met phenomenal people from over 20 different countries and just saw things I couldn't imagine I would ever get to see. And so very grateful for that. Well, today we're actually launching into a new series about rewriting your story in life. And for some of us, this is frustrating because maybe you've tried to rewrite your story in life and you wind up in the same chapter all the time. It's like Groundhog Day, the movie. You just keep waking up in the same place. How did this happen? And what I want us to know is that that's what will usually happen when we try to rewrite our story. That the rewriting of our story, the reason it's a source of hope for us is not that we're rewriting it, but that God is rewriting it. And it's not as though we have the same... We desire to be in the same place, doing the same things, in the same situations. But there are things that are true about how we process life, how we think about life, how we respond to life that tends to position us for that kind of repetitive cycle that we feel like we get caught in. And so Paul wants us to know that if our story needs to be rewritten, it can be rewritten by God. Now, Philippi is a very interesting city, and that's the believers that he's writing to live there. Paul is actually writing from prison when he writes this. He's in Rome, and he's in a jail cell. And he writes to believers in Philippi. And Philippi is a really interesting city for a couple of reasons, not the least of which is that where it's located right then, that city was built on the site of a battlefield. And that battle was actually a civil war in Rome. Up to 200,000 soldiers fought and died in that conflict. And some wanted to overthrow the existing government, some wanted to make sure it stayed in place. And so the result was that at least half the people were going to be dissatisfied with how things went, how it turned out. And so in a civil war situation like that, there's going to be people who are automatically disappointed by defeat, but then we don't realize there are other people who are automatically disappointed when the victory does not accomplish the things they hope to be accomplished if their side won. So they're facing disappointment too. And on top of that, there's this idea in Philippi. It's a Roman colony, and it's strategically located on a trade route as well, so they can protect supplies coming in and out of Rome, because that's life. And so if you worked in Philippi, it was likely that was a government job. In fact, we learn in the book of Acts about the Philippian jailer. That man had previously been in the military, and kind of when he retired out of military, he gets this job. Like, Rome is still signing his paychecks, which means that there's an instant conflict that develops, because in Philippi, people would very freely say, Caesar is Lord. He's the one who's in charge of everything. He's the one, like, if he says something, that's what we've got to do. And believers really struggled with that because they believed there was only one Lord, and that was Jesus. And their unwillingness to compromise on that caused a lot of controversy and, quite honestly, some persecution. Things weren't going very well. And so if you were a person who had been pretty loyal to Rome, and then you became a believer, now you can't say what you used to say about the government, well, it creates problems. And what Paul wants people to know is that our story being rewritten is not really based on who is controlling the government. Whether you're on the losing side and you just gave up all hope when the white flag went up, or whether you're on the winning side and you're slowly raising your white flag because it's not turning out the way that you want, Paul wants us to know that it is not any human system of government that is going to rewrite the story of our lives. And he tells us this. It really is quite remarkable in verse 27 of the first chapter. Above all, this is most important, above all, you must live as citizens of heaven, conducting yourselves in a manner worthy of the good news about Christ. What he's saying is, you can't put your expectations in human systems, as well developed as they are, as well intended as they are, as altruistic as they are, as much good as they do. They can help in the story we're in. They won't rewrite our story. The only thing that rewrites our story is God. And so he tells us, we may be tied, our hope may be tied to our ability to project out what's going to happen, to predict. And certainly you've had this happen to you, right? You were trying out for a job and you got past the first round of interviews, and then you got to the second round of interviews, and however many there are, you find yourself towards the end of the process, and what do you have? You'll tell yourself you have hope. And then they tell you, yeah, we've chosen someone else. Then what happens to your hope? And what Paul is saying is that our hope is not tied to our predictions or to favorable outcomes, which is very different than the world teaches us. Because the way the world teaches us is if the person we want to ask out says no, or the job doesn't come through, or the pay raise isn't put in place, or they reject our offer on the home that we want, we are told that our hope has been dashed. And what Paul wants us to know is, if your hope is dashed by that, then what you've got is not a biblical hope. And he's not telling us just to pretend things are all right. He wants to give us some very important information. For lots of people, hope only works when they can predict outcomes and things are going according to plan. And what Paul wants us to know is that's not how it works. Question, is hope so fragile that it can only survive perfect environments? And that's why people say, well, don't give them false hope. And often what they mean by that is you're tying a hope to an outcome. And when that outcome doesn't happen, then their hopes will be dashed. They'll lose hope. Paul has a very different way to think about this. What does it look like when somebody loses hope? It's interesting to think about, and maybe you could spend a little time today thinking about it. What does it look like when you lose hope? What does it look like when parents lose hope for their children? What does it look like when one spouse loses hope for another spouse? What does it look like when a person who's struggling, whatever that struggle is, it might be to a chemical addiction, it might be financially, when they're struggling and they lose hope, what does that look like? When a person is sick and their body just doesn't seem to be trending in an improving direction, if they lose hope, what does that look like? And the answer is, it's consistent, they give up. They quit. They stop trying. They convince themselves that as bad as things are, it's not as bad as disappointment. So they just quit trying. We resign ourselves to things staying as they are right now. We comfort ourselves with the idea that just accepting things as they are is the rational thing to do. It's the only thing that makes sense. So consequently, disappointment and fear starts driving all of our decisions. So in this first chapter in Philippians, Paul actually pounds home some ideas that I think will be very helpful if we want to experience a biblical kind of hope and have our story rewritten, not just by ourselves or by somebody else. By the way, if you don't know, one of the most terrifying things in the world is when somebody else starts rewriting your story. I don't remember who said it, but they basically said if someone else is rewriting your story, you're going to be a two-bit player in their story. It's not an interesting or enjoyable place to be. So what does Paul tell us? The first thing he tells us is this, is that biblical hope is planted in God's commitment. Biblical hope is planted in God's commitment. Hear that. It's not your commitment. Biblical hope is planted in God's commitment. This is what he says. I am certain that God who began a good work within you will continue this work until it is finally finished on the day when Christ Jesus returns. That God who began a good work within you will complete it. That God doesn't lose hope. See, we think a lot of times that God is like us. That's why we see our stumbles, our struggles, our failures, our missteps, our misdeeds, all of that, as though we've just frustrated God to the last and the nth degree, and we just said, that's it, like God is up in heaven going, that's it, I've had it with this person. And Paul says, I am convinced that the God who began a good work in you will complete that work. He will keep working. He will not quit. God finishes what he started. God finishes what he started. When other people have quit on you, it has left holes in your life and wounds in your heart, and it's very difficult to move forward, and you may have quit on yourself. And some of us think that's it. Even that was a line I shouldn't have crossed, but I did, and that's where I am. And Paul's confidence, his assurance, isn't in that you won't quit on yourself, or that you won't quit on other things, or that other people won't quit on you. His confidence is God will not quit on you. Is there anybody in the house this morning that's glad God never quits on you? Never. He won't give up. Never forsaken. He won't. So if you don't know, I was raised in a classical Pentecostal church. And so our services were a bunch of things that are a little bit different than ours. One is they were longer. Second, they were louder. And preaching went a lot longer and a lot louder. My dad used to say this. He used to say that if a pastor doesn't work up a sweat when he's preaching, he's all dried up. And, so I'm tempted right now to go into Pentecostal mode on this part of the message, because this is what I want to tell you. God won't ghost you. He won't abandon you when even you have given up on yourself or other people have given up on you. But God will Holy Ghost you, which means he empowers you to keep going in the day that he's given you, to face the challenges that you have to face to get where he wants you to be. How many are glad about that? All right. That was the shorter, non-sweaty version of that. Our hope is not rooted in our ability. It's in God's ability. So maybe that's what God is saying to you today. Trust me. I'm going to finish what I started in you. Trust me. See, we're looking for proof. Our assumption is proof is my foundation for hope. And Paul realized if you're looking for proof, you will constantly be disappointed. But if you're looking to trust, God is worthy of trust. And he can do anything. The second point is biblical hope grows in community. Biblical hope grows in community. This is what Paul says. Every time I think of you, I give thanks to my God. Whenever I pray, I make my requests for all of you with joy, for you have been, listen to this, my partners in spreading the good news about Christ from the time you first heard of it until now. You have been my partners. You have been my partners in spreading the good news of Christ. Paul is embedded in community. It doesn't seem to him at all, even though he finds himself in lonely places and spaces, he doesn't consider that he is alone. He understands that in an age of isolation, which we have not outgrown, and I can argue we have improved isolation at unbelievable levels in our culture, that in an age of isolation, the way of Jesus is still deeply communal. That we don't isolate ourselves. Paul understands that shared meals and shared food and shared prayer and shared vision builds hope. And he knows something about hope that surprises us. What he knows about hope is that hope this is phenomenal. I hope you can grasp this morning because I think it will be super helpful to you. Hope can be borrowed. When you don't have it, you can borrow hope from somebody else. Did you know that? It's absolutely true. Hope can be shared. When you have hope, you can share it with others so they can share it with you. Hope can even be carried for us when we have no hope for ourselves until we get hope for ourselves. It's absolutely amazing. Paul understands this. Question, who are the people in your life that bring hope to you? And I was thinking about this, and I came across a complexity. And that is, I think we're often attracted to people in our life that don't bring hope. The hope sharers, the hope holders, the hope givers are not always the coolest people in the room. And I wonder how often we refuse to accept hope because we want it to come from a person whose standing is a little higher or their income is a little greater. And yet anyone that's part of the body of Christ can be a carrier of hope. So who in your life, you might want to be intentional about scheduling a little more time with them. And then secondly, who are you sharing hope with? Who's a person in your life that you could spend some time and invest hope into them? Third point. I know the speed at which I'm going through these points is giving you hope, isn't it? Yes. Hope even redeems suffering. Hope even redeems suffering. Look at what Paul says. I want you to know, my dear brothers and sisters, that everything that has happened to me here, everything that has happened to me here, everything that has happened to me here has helped me to spread the good news. For everyone here, including the whole palace guard, knows I am in chains because of Christ. And because of my imprisonment, most of the believers here have gained confidence and boldly speak God's message without fear. If you don't know, Paul is actually in prison at this point in Rome. He's going to stand trial. Some of his teaching has been considered acts of sedition against the government. If found guilty, he will be executed. And there are people who, even though their background and their connections are religious, they very much want Paul out of the way, and so they're pushing this narrative, and they're trying to get this done as fast as possible. So Paul is in prison, and prison back then wasn't a fun place to be. Like, he was in chains. He's in chains. And it's fascinating to me that Paul is able to focus on something beside his chains. Like when stuff happens in your life that limits you in some way, don't you focus on that? Like I sprained an ankle on the Camino, and it made life pretty miserable for a couple of days. And do you know what I was focusing on? I also had some problems with an Achilles tendon. You know what I was focusing on? And then shin splints and blisters. I lost 2 toenails. One on each foot, which means I looked more like this as a pilgrim, you know? It's kind of like that. You know what it's easy to focus on? The thing that hurts. The chain that's holding you back. We focus on the things that limit us in life. I could do this except for this. And Paul, he looks at the chain. He doesn't ignore the chain. He doesn't pretend the chain isn't there. He's not one of those people who say, oh, bless God, there's nothing that can chain me. He says, nope, the chain is on. But at the other end of that chain is a guard. And Paul focuses on the person that's in the room with him rather than the chain that's been locked around him. And he comes up with this great idea. Maybe it'll help you. I am not chained to the guard. The guard is chained to me. Here's a person. It would be easy to see him as just some kind of representation of a governmental structure, injustice in some way. There are all these things that we can compile and put on people so that we don't have to respect them or treat them with dignity or respect. Like we do this all the time, and our culture does this at levels that is terrifying. And so we don't have to give them any. They're here to keep me here. I don't have to show any respect. And what does Paul do instead? That's a person, and that person doesn't know the good news about Jesus yet, and I could share it with them. And this is what Paul says. He said, everything that's happened to me here, the imprisonment, the arrest, I'm stuck in this cell until I get a hearing, I'm being chained to a guard, everything that's been happened to me here is so that I can spread the good news of Jesus. And then he says this, the whole palace guard. These are not just, this is the palace guard. The whole palace guard knows about Jesus because of me. The next guard that comes on shift, they get the next discipleship class. Isn't that amazing? He never assumed, he's a guard in Rome. That person is not interested in God. He assumed every single person was. Isn't that amazing? That's what hope looks like. See, our hope is to be out of the jail and off the chain and being surrounded by people who celebrate us instead of being in a jail with a chain and connected to a guard. And yet that is not biblical hope, because you will be very disappointed if your idea is to be out and up. But what Paul realizes is, I didn't even have to get out. I didn't even have to go up. God is bringing the elite palace guard right to me, and I get to preach the gospel to them. Don't you love that? Don't you love that? I think that's a great way to see life. The result is that they heard the gospel. He doesn't pretend. He doesn't see this as an impossibility. Fourth point. Hope helps you see your effort and your end differently. Your effort, what you do in life and how you do it, and your end in life. This is his words. I fully expect and hope, there it is, see, that I will never be ashamed, but that I will continue to be bold for Christ, as I have been in the past. And I trust, there's that word, that my life will bring honor to Christ, whether I live or die. For to me, living means living for Christ, and dying is even better. And don't get me wrong, I've heard people say dying is better, but not for the reason Paul is saying it. But if I live, I can do more fruitful work for Christ. So I really don't know which is better. I'm torn between two desires. I long to go and be with Christ, which would be far better for me. But for your sakes, it is better that I continue to live. Knowing this, I'm convinced that I will remain alive, so I can continue to help all of you grow and experience the joy of your faith. I'm going to ask the worship team to come out. Paul's hope isn't just about surviving the experience to live another day. He does this amazing thing that while he is in prison and while he is facing trial and potential execution, that he's able to live open-handed, that he's able to live unafraid, that he's able to live focused on what matters most. I think for some of us, when our trust is anchored in something other than God, we find it difficult to risk, to love, and to keep going. But because Paul's trust was in the one who never quits on him, will never quit on him, you couldn't create a scenario where he thought God would give up. So Paul is able and willing to continue to invest in others. And this is the most amazing thing. Now, not only is his story being rewritten, but their stories are being rewritten too. He's learned that when nothing looks good, when the windows have bars on them, and your wrists and your ankles have chains on them, and you can't go where you want, that God is still writing his story in you, and he's not given up. If this chapter is not the one that you like in your life, hang on. Because God is not going to finish with you in a jail cell, bound up by something, unable to do anything. How many are glad God is the one who rewrites our story? He rewrites our story. So, I have more to share, but I'm out of time. So, that happens to me a lot. Two things I would challenge you with. And the first is this. Each morning, I'd like you to say this: Jesus, I trust you to finish what you started in me, in my family, and in my life. Let's try that together. Jesus, I trust you to finish what you started in me, in my family, and in my life. Can we stand together? Let's say this one more time. Jesus, I trust you to finish what you started in me, in my family, and in my life.